The sun rose lazily over the Texas horizon as the Sterling Ranch slowly came to life, surrounded by golden hills and fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was an old, grand estate, silent, dignified, and known not just for its vast size, but for the man who owned it. Benjamin Sterling, a billionaire rancher of few words and eyes that carried the weight of a distant past. With his hat always perfectly in place and his boots firmly rooted to the ground, Benjamin was respected by everyone in the region. Yet he carried a quiet melancholy that no one could quite explain. A man who possessed everything money could buy, he held tightly to the kind of pain that time itself could not erase. His land was admired by many, but what truly stirred curiosity was a secluded paddock at the far southern edge of the property. That was where Apollo lived. Apollo was no ordinary horse, black as the night, with piercing eyes and a wild, powerful physique. He looked like he'd stepped out of an ancient legend. It was said he'd been captured in the mountains after attacking a man who tried to approach him. No ranch hand dared get near. Veterinarians refused to treat him. Stable boys trembled at the mere sound of his whinny. To many, he was a monster. To others, a living legend. Yet Benjamin never allowed him to be put down. No one understood why he insisted on keeping the beast despite the risks. It was a mystery, an unspoken bond between man and animal that left the entire region intrigued. The reason for this strange attachment came to light one blustery afternoon, when Benjamin stumbled upon an old wooden box in his barn. Inside was a faded photo of a white mare with a mane so long it looked like a veil. Beside her stood a smiling little boy, Benjamin, around 8 years old. His hands trembled as he held the forgotten image. The mare's name was Celeste, his best friend during childhood, who had vanished in a storm many years before. What shocked him most was the mare's eyes, bright, intense, almost human. The same eyes he now saw in Apollo. The realization sent chills down his spine. For the first time in years, he felt that maybe Apollo wasn't just a wild horse, but a living connection to a piece of his lost past. Before continuing, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. As the mystery deepened, whispers began to spread among the ranch workers. $1 million reward was being quietly offered to anyone who could tame Apollo. $1 million. There were no posters, no announcements. It was as if Benjamin hoped for someone special to appear, someone who could do what he no longer could. Despite the offer, no one dared to try. The horse remained untouched, as if waiting for something or someone. Meanwhile, the ranch kept to its daily rhythm, with horses being trained, deals being made, and trucks coming and going. But beneath it all was always that sound. Apollo's fierce, echoing whinny, carried on the wind like a cry for help no one dared answer. And so, in that land of silence and secrets, the story began. A story not merely about horses or wealth, but about soul, memory, and broken hearts still searching for peace. Benjamin, despite all his riches, lived in emotional solitude and seemed to have lost faith in miracles. But fate, as unpredictable as ever, was already turning the page, and that next page would come from the most unlikely place. The heart of a young girl, far from there, with the same hope in her eyes that he once had in his. At that moment, no one could have foreseen that the footsteps of a sorrowful child were about to change everything, including Apollo's heart, and his own. Emma gripped the strap of her backpack tightly as she stepped off the bus near the clinic where her grandmother went for physical therapy. She was only 12, but her eyes held the maturity of someone who had lost far more than she should have. Ever since they'd left the small farm where they used to live, nothing felt quite right. The city streets were noisy, the neighbors distant, and time always seemed to rush forward without caring about anyone. Her grandmother, Mrs. Clara, was the only family she had left. But now, with fragile knees and tired lungs, Clara spent more time with doctors than in her garden. Emma missed the mornings filled with damp earth, the roosters crowing in the distance, and most of all, the horses. Her mother, Rachel had been passionate about animals. She grew up among barns and mountains and taught her daughter everything she knew. Emma learned to saddle a horse before she even learned how to ride a bike. She knew how to earn the trust of a skittish colt just with the calm in her gaze. But Rachel passed away early, taken by a violent storm that struck one summer night. She had gone out to rescue 2 horses lost in the fields and never returned. Emma remembered the door left open, the porch light still on, and the heavy silence that filled the house that night. After that, it was just her and Clara trying to keep the farm running with what little they had. But her grandmother's body could no longer take the strain, and the doctor was blunt. Either they moved to the city for treatment, or they'd lose everything. City life was a shock. Emma couldn't adjust to the new school. Her classmates mocked her simple ways, her country slang, and especially her love for horses. She felt invisible, out of place, strange. After school, she liked to wander without a destination, as if searching for something she couldn't quite name. Sometimes she sat alone on benches in public squares, watching people pass by. There was a certain sadness in the way that girl looked down while the world rushed on. Yet inside her lived a quiet strength, shaped by both pain and tenderness. Even lost, her heart remained true to what she loved. Deep down, she knew she would return to the horses someday. She just didn't know how. One gray afternoon, sitting on a bench in the town square, Emma overheard a conversation that would change everything. 2 men, wearing boots and cowboy hats, were talking loudly about that wild horse and some ranch out in the country. One of them mentioned a $1 million reward for anyone who could tame the animal. The other scoffed, "Even with that money, no one's gonna try. That horse is crazy. Pure devil." Emma's eyes widened. A wild horse? A ranch? It was as if a door had opened inside her. But what caught her attention most wasn't the money. It was the pain she sensed in the way they spoke about the animal. Something deep within her whispered, "He's not evil, just hurt, like her." Emma stayed awake the entire night, staring at the ceiling and wondering what to do. She made up her mind she had to find that ranch. Not for the money, but to do what her heart was telling her, to help. The next morning, while Clara rested, Emma went to an internet cafe and searched for everything she could about Texas ranches and wild horses. She found little information, but one name stood out: Sterling Ranch. She scribbled the address on a scrap of paper and ran home. It was far, she knew that, but it didn't matter. For the first time since her mother died, Emma felt like she had a purpose. And even without knowing how, she would leave. Because when a calling is real, you don't ask if it's possible. You just go. Emma woke before the sun had risen. While the city still slept, she slipped on her worn-out sneakers, tied her hair back with a cloth band, and put on her mother's old denim jacket, the one that still carried the scent of hay and lavender. In her backpack, she packed a bottle of water, 2 sandwiches, a thin blanket, and the slip of paper with the name of the ranch. Sterling Ranch. She didn't tell her grandmother, not because she meant to deceive her, but because she knew Clara wouldn't allow it. She had no money, no transportation, and no solid plan. But she did have something many adults had long forgotten: faith. Faith that the road would open if she followed her heart. And with that burning inside her chest, she began walking toward the unknown. The city roads felt endless when you were on foot. Cars sped by, indifferent to the small figure walking along the shoulder of the highway. Emma didn't ask for rides. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. She stopped at gas stations to use the restroom and bought water with the coins she had saved for weeks. One night, she slept under a storefront awning. The next, on a wooden bench near a rural church. She felt hunger, cold, fear, but never turned back. With every step, her conviction grew stronger. She thought of Apollo as someone lost, wounded, misunderstood. His pain seemed to mirror her own, and that thought pushed her forward, even when her feet ached and her eyes burned with exhaustion. After 3 days of walking, Emma finally spotted the entrance to Sterling Ranch in the distance. A massive iron gate, flanked by endless white fences, guarded the estate. Signs read "Private Property," and cameras watched from tall posts. Emma stood before that gate as if she were standing at the entrance of a temple. Doubts weighed on her. What if they didn't let her in? What if it had all been for nothing? But she didn't hesitate. She pressed the intercom. No answer. She returned the next day and tried again. Still nothing. On the third day, she sat down at the gate and waited. She ate a piece of bread and wrote in the notebook she always carried, "I'm here for him, and I'll wait as long as it takes." The ranch workers began to notice the fragile figure camped near the gate. A skinny girl with scraped knees and determined eyes who slept under a tree, wrapped in a thin blanket as night fell. Some of them laughed. Others ignored her. But one of them mentioned it to Benjamin Sterling. "There's a girl camped out at the gate. Says she wants to see Apollo." The rancher frowned. "Another one after the reward?" he asked, without looking up. "I don't think so. She doesn't want money. She just doesn't seem able to leave." That stirred something in Benjamin. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition. Because once, long ago, he too had stood before a gate, waiting for life to let him back in. On the fifth day, when Emma had no more bread, no more coins, and almost no strength left, she heard the sound of the gate creaking open. She jumped to her feet, heart pounding in her chest. A tall man with a stern face and a dark hat appeared next to a security guard. "You're here for Apollo?" he asked. Emma nodded, eyes brimming with tears. "Why?" he wanted to know. She answered, her voice trembling but resolute. "Because I know what it's like to be treated like you're dangerous when really, you're just hurt." Benjamin said nothing. That sentence, spoken with such simple truth, cut straight through his defenses. And just like that, she was let in. Not for the reward, but because of her heart. Emma was led to the most secluded part of the ranch by one of the cowboys, in complete silence. The path was long, bordered by fences, trees, and the distant sound of horses trotting. As they drew closer to the restricted barn, the air grew heavier, as if something sacred or dangerous resided there. The ranch hand opened one of the wooden gates and pointed ahead. "There. He's in the paddock." Emma took a deep breath. In the distance, she saw the imposing black horse, neck held high, wild mane blowing in the wind, and eyes that looked like they carried a storm inside. Apollo was restless, circling as if sensing the presence of someone different. Still, Emma didn't flinch. The ranch hands stepped back, watching from afar. Benjamin, hidden behind a wooden structure, was also observing, though she didn't know it. Emma walked slowly to the fence and said nothing. She didn't reach out, didn't try to control him. She simply stood there and looked at him, not as a problem, but as someone wounded. Then, gently, she lowered herself, sat on the grass, and turned her back to him. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the onlookers. "She turned her back on the horse," someone whispered. "She's out of her mind." But Emma knew exactly what she was doing. It was something her mother had taught her, respect. By turning away, she was saying, "I'm not a threat. You choose." For several long minutes, there was no sound but the wind. Apollo stopped. He sniffed the air, lowered his head. His intense eyes focused on the still girl with dirty knees and messy braids. Then, slowly, he took one step. Then another. The ground vibrated under his hooves. The cowboys held their breath. Benjamin narrowed his eyes. And then it happened. The horse gently touched his muzzle to Emma's shoulder, as if to say, "I see you." Emma didn't move right away. When she felt his breath near her, she slowly turned, unhurried. Her eyes met Apollo's. And in that moment, a wordless language was born between them. Fear gave way to surrender. Emma raised a hand and placed it on the horse's neck. Warm skin, steady pulse. Apollo didn't retreat. He closed his eyes, and for a moment time stopped. No man, no matter how strong or experienced, had ever touched that horse without a fight. But there she was, a 12-year-old girl, with a serenity that no brute strength could match. The ranch hands exchanged stunned glances. Benjamin, watching that scene, touched the brim of his hat and lowered his gaze. He felt something he hadn't felt in years: humility, and maybe, just maybe, hope. Emma finally looked at him and said, "He just needed someone to listen." In the days that followed, she began visiting Apollo every afternoon. With each meeting, she took one more step forward. She spoke to him in a soft voice, gently stroked his back, fed him apples, and read passages from a book she kept in her pocket. It was as if she was healing Apollo's invisible wounds with the same tenderness she used to mend her own. The entire ranch began to wait for the moments when Emma would appear. It was like watching poetry being written without a page. The once feared animal now allowed himself to be brushed, touched, and eventually accept a saddle. And so, on the 15th day, something extraordinary happened. In front of everyone, Emma mounted Apollo for the first time. And instead of resisting, he walked with grace. It was as if, at last, he had found peace. The news spread like wildfire across the rolling hills of the ranch. Emma had managed to ride Apollo. No one could believe what they had witnessed. It was like watching a miracle born from patience. The horse no cowboy had dared to approach now walked calmly under the light guidance of a 12-year-old girl. There were no ropes pulling, no shouted commands. Only connection, a silence between the two that spoke louder than words. That evening, when Emma dismounted and gently stroked the horse's neck, the ranch hands, once skeptical, began to applaud. Not for the taming, but for the tenderness, the faith, the invisible transformation they had just seen. Benjamin watched from a distance, standing still, his eyes wet with emotion. Something within him gave way. A long-lost, perhaps forgotten, but never extinguished feeling: tenderness. Emma didn't look at him with expectation, didn't ask for anything. She simply walked to the fence and said, "He's ready, but I'm not." The rancher smiled for the first time in years. The workers began calling her the Miracle Girl, but she dismissed the title. "I just listened to what he couldn't say," she'd reply with quiet grace. And there was a kind of ancient wisdom in her, as if Emma had been born for this: to restore, to heal, not with medicine but with presence. From that day forward, Emma came to the ranch every afternoon after school. The city still made her sad, but now she had a reason to smile. Apollo waited for her. When he saw her crossing the field, he would let out a soft whinny and trot up to the fence. It was like reuniting with a lost part of herself. Benjamin allowed her to help with the other horses too, and soon, Emma was teaching grown adults how to approach with more gentleness. She didn't enforce techniques, she offered glances. Meanwhile, her grandmother's health was stabilizing, thanks to treatment quietly paid for by Benjamin. But Emma didn't know that. All she wanted was to be there, and she was. Over time, Emma began writing her experiences in a blue-covered notebook. She wrote about the horses, about her mother, and about feelings she didn't yet know how to name. One of the ranch hands found the notebook left behind in the barn and read a passage. "Apollo isn't wild. He just spent too long alone. And no one stays whole without love." The words spread quietly across the ranch like a gentle fire. Everyone began to see the horse and the girl differently. The place, once defined by discipline and profit, began to shift. There was more silence, more patience, more humanity. All because one girl had the courage to hear what no one else would. On the 16th day, Benjamin asked her to sit and talk. They sat beneath the shade of an old tree near the barn where Apollo rested. He said, "You changed my horse, but I think you changed something in me too." Emma looked at him, unsure what he meant. Then Benjamin handed her a thick envelope. It was the reward, $1 million. Her eyes widened, and with calm certainty, she replied, "Mr. Sterling, I don't want this money." The silence lingered. Then she added, "I just want to come here, be with the horses, learn, and feel like there's still a little bit of the farm in me." The man, used to deals and contracts, felt his chest tighten. Because for the first time, someone had asked him for only one thing: permission to love. Benjamin remained silent for a long time after hearing Emma refuse the reward. He was used to people who approached him out of self-interest, driven by ambition, status, or greed. But here, sitting before him, was a child asking for something so rare it hurt: belonging. He rested his elbows on his knees, gazed down at the ground covered in dry leaves, and asked quietly, "Emma, who are you, really?" The girl didn't hesitate. For the first time, she felt she could tell her story without rushing, without shame. With a soft voice and steady eyes, she began to unravel her past, thread by thread, like someone gently undoing an old knot. She spoke about the farm where she was born, about her mother Rachel, who seemed made of sunlight and earth, a gentle yet strong woman who spoke to horses as if they were lifelong friends. Emma remembered the mornings they spent tending to the animals, the goodnight kisses that smelled like hay, and the lessons whispered like prayers. Never treat an animal with fear. He needs to see in you what he rarely finds in humans: peace. Then she told him about the night of the storm. Rachel had run into the woods to save 2 terrified horses. She never came back. They found her 2 days later, lifeless, but still clutching the reins of one of the horses she had rescued. Emma paused. Then, after a deep breath, she went on. She spoke of how she tried to be strong, how she held her grandmother in her arms when she broke down, of the mornings she rose alone to feed the horses, and the afternoons where the silence of absence screamed louder than words. The farm held on for a while, but Clara's illness worsened. With no help, they were forced to sell everything and move to the city. There's no smell of grass there, no sound of horses, no real sky, Emma said, her eyes filled with longing. Benjamin listened without a word, as if hearing a sacred prayer. He felt the girl's pain echoing through his own losses. Her story was a bridge back to the boy he once was, and had to bury far too soon. Emma then explained how she had overheard the conversation about Apollo, and something in her heart had ignited. It wasn't greed. It was empathy. She said she couldn't stand to see an animal treated as a threat simply because it couldn't express its pain. "I think Apollo and I are the same. People look at us and see what they're afraid to face in themselves." Benjamin felt a tightness in his chest. No one had ever spoken about Apollo with such tenderness. More than that, no one had ever looked at him with such raw truth. For the first time, he saw Apollo as something more than a wild, unbreakable creature. He saw him as a mirror, and Emma, without even realizing it, was helping him see himself. When she finished, the silence between them was heavy with meaning. Benjamin stood up, walked a few steps, and looked out over the horizon. He finally said, "Emma, you have no idea what you've done here." Then he turned around, crouched to her level, and said in a voice both serious and kind, "I can't let you go back to that city and fade away again." She opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a gentle hand. "From now on, you come whenever you want. This ranch is yours, too." Emma smiled but didn't cry. Her tears she kept inside. What she had gained there was more than freedom. It was belonging. It was solid ground beneath her feet. And for the first time since her mother's death, she finally felt she was home. The next morning, Benjamin woke before the sun. There was something different in his chest, as if time had started beating with purpose again. He dressed with more ease, free from the stiffness that had weighed on him for years, and drove into town. He found the small house where Emma lived with Clara. The door was old, weathered wood with a pot of dried plants beside it. He knocked gently. Clara, surprised, appeared slowly, her steps cautious, her smile unsure. Benjamin introduced himself as a man indebted to her granddaughter. She raised her eyebrows, suspicious. "Did she get into some kind of trouble?" she asked, half joking. He smiled and replied, "She fixed something." They sat together on the porch, and Benjamin told her everything Emma had done. He spoke of Apollo, of the unexplainable bond, of the kindness that flowed so naturally from the girl. Clara listened in silence, tears quietly slipping down her cheeks. At the end, he offered help. He said he would cover her medical treatment, renovate the house, and support Emma so she could attend a better school, closer to the ranch. Clara hesitated. She was a woman of principle with old-fashioned pride. "I don't want charity, Mr. Sterling," she murmured. Benjamin, with steady eyes and a calm voice, replied, "This isn't charity, it's gratitude, and it's also an invitation." A respectful silence settled between them. The offer was accepted with one condition. Emma had to want it, and she did. She wanted it with all her heart. For the first time, school no longer felt like a burden. She started attending a smaller, more welcoming institution, with classes in natural sciences and even horseback riding. Each morning, she boarded the bus Benjamin sent for her, and every afternoon she went straight to the ranch. The routine there was simple but full of life. Feeding the horses, cleaning their hooves, organizing the stables, and, of course, spending long moments with Apollo under the setting sun. The ranch, once ruled by schedules and profit, began to beat to a new rhythm, a more human one, a more alive one. The staff began to respect her, not because they were told to, but because they recognized something in her. Emma listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, it was with gentleness and quiet strength. She had a way with animals that defied technique and formula. It was as if she could feel what they felt. Benjamin, little by little, began inviting her to lunch at his house, then to Sunday dinners. They talked about life, about grief, about silences. These weren't forced bonds. They were connections slowly intertwining, like roots searching for the same soil. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew they were building something rare, a place of belonging. One evening, as they watched the moonlight stretch across the fields, Benjamin said, "Did you know Apollo was scheduled to be put down 3 times?" Emma turned to him, startled. He continued, "But every time the moment came, I backed out. Something stopped me. Now I understand why." Emma didn't answer. She simply reached out and gently took his hand. No words were needed. In that gesture was an agreement not on paper but in spirit. A silent pact between a girl searching for a home and a man relearning how to love. And both of them knew, deep down, this meeting had never been a coincidence. It was destiny. Time on the ranch began to move to a new rhythm after Emma became part of Benjamin's days. Mornings were no longer just productive, they became hopeful. Coffee was shared between two, with conversations made of glances and silences that needed no explaining. Emma still carried the same simple way about her, but now her eyes held a steady light, a reflection of belonging. Benjamin, in turn, let slip unexpected smiles and small gestures of care he hadn't known how to give in years. What once was routine had become affection, and the ranch, once known for its efficiency and rigidity, now began to feel like a home. Their bond grew slowly, without rush or labels. Emma still called him Mr. Sterling, though sometimes the Mr. would disappear when she laughed. Benjamin often said she'd done more for the ranch than any cattle investment he had ever made. The workers, once formal and distant, began including Emma in everything. She was invited to group lunches, to help with small decisions, and even to sit around the campfire and listen to old stories. But the most beautiful part was what was left unsaid. She was loved there, not as a guest, but as someone who belonged. Apollo, ever quiet and observant, seemed to understand it. Whenever Emma approached, he would shake his head gently, as if recognizing the soul of home. Benjamin began to trust her with more than tasks. He trusted her with his stories. He spoke of his lonely youth, of Celeste, the mare who vanished and left a hole in his soul. He spoke of loves that never worked out because he'd never truly learned how to love. And Emma listened like someone guarding sacred secrets, without judgment, without interruption. In one of those conversations, he said, "You remind me of someone I wished I had been." She smiled gently and replied, "And you remind me of someone I can still become." That simple, honest exchange echoed in Benjamin's mind for days. It was as if she could see him more clearly than he ever saw himself. As the days passed, the ranch itself began to grow. With Benjamin's support, Emma began to study animal behavior more deeply. She visited veterinarians, read books, observed with keen eyes. But she never lost her essence. She listened before she acted. Benjamin beamed with quiet pride. But one day, standing before the staff, he pointed at Emma and said, "This girl is the most important thing that's ever come through these gates." The team applauded with genuine respect. Emma blushed, but said nothing. She knew that love was present, even if it wasn't spoken like in the movies. It was love in the warm coffee, the clean apron, the well-fed horse. It was love that was real. One overcast afternoon, as they walked side by side, Benjamin asked, "Emma, have you ever thought about what you want to be when you grow up?" She didn't hesitate. "I want to be someone who makes others feel seen." He paused for a moment, deeply moved. He had never heard such an honest answer. In that instant, he realized his life had changed forever, not because of business or achievements, but because of love planted in fertile soil. It was as if destiny had intertwined the hearts of a girl who needed to be welcomed and a man who needed to learn how to care again. And neither of them ever wanted to go back to who they were before. Time, with its gentle relentlessness, began to draw lines on Clara's face. Despite the proper treatments, the right medication, and Benjamin's attentive care, age and years of hard work were taking their toll. Emma noticed every change, slower steps, longer naps, a memory that sometimes slipped away. Still, Clara insisted on smiling every time her granddaughter returned from the ranch. "You came back smelling like horses and happiness," she would say, and Emma would sit beside her, telling stories of how Apollo had learned a new command, or how Benjamin nearly fell over trying to groom a young colt. It was a life exchange between generations. One teaching the value of patience, the other, the promise of hope. One morning, Clara didn't get up. Emma walked into the bedroom with breakfast and found her sleeping soundly. She called her name once, then again and again. But the silence responded gently. Clara had passed away in the early hours, peacefully, with a faint smile on her lips and a colorful blanket draped over her shoulders. Emma didn't cry right away. She sat quietly by the bed, holding her grandmother's hand the same way she used to when she was little. It was Benjamin who found her there hours later, still and composed, her eyes full but her posture steady. "She's gone, Mr. Sterling," she said in a fragile voice, and he understood that something in Emma had changed forever. The funeral was simple, just as Clara would have wanted. A few old neighbors, ranch workers, and people whose lives had been touched by her kindness gathered to say goodbye. Emma read a passage from Clara's diary, found tucked between books on a shelf. "Emma is made of roots. Even when pulled from the ground, she blooms wherever she's planted." Her words moved everyone there, including Benjamin, who felt a lump rise in his throat as he witnessed the strength with which that girl said her farewell. After the burial, Emma returned to the empty house, but something within her led her back to the ranch. It wasn't an escape, it was a return. She knew exactly where she belonged, and for the first time she felt she didn't need to ask permission. When Benjamin saw her arrive, he said nothing. He simply opened his arms. Emma ran into that embrace, firm, safe, from someone who wasn't her father by blood, but by choice. They stayed there for a long while in silence. Then he led her to the main house. "You don't need to go back to that house alone anymore. This is your home now." Emma looked around, recognizing the scent of wood, the song of the birds, Apollo's distant whinny. Everything around her seemed to say, "You belong." With tears in her eyes, she nodded, not as someone accepting help, but as someone who had found her place in the world. From that moment on, Emma began living in the big house. The guest room became her own, filled with mementos from the countryside, memories of her grandmother, and reflections of who she was becoming. Her notebooks multiplied, and her voice gained weight in the ranch's decisions. Apollo grew older beside her, carrying the same quiet dignity she had once seen in Clara. Benjamin cared for her as if he had always been her father, with respect, admiration, and love. And Emma, now 17, knew that her journey was far from ordinary. It had been marked by loss, yes, but also by chosen bonds, affections built with patience, and a silent legacy. The gift of turning pain into shelter. And moving forward, Apollo now walked more slowly. His once powerful steps had become measured and reflective, as if each one held the wisdom of someone who had seen and lived through too much. Emma watched him with tenderness, honoring his pace, sitting beside him in the evenings just to be near. There was no longer a need to ride or lead. Their connection had evolved into something deeper, a silent presence that said everything. The horse who had once terrified an entire ranch now let children gently stroke his mane, as if he understood that his purpose had changed. He had become a symbol, not of strength, but of transformation. Benjamin had a special saddle carved for Apollo, designed only for the days when Emma wanted to take short rides through the fields. They never lasted more than a few minutes, but they were enough to revive the deep connection between them. During one of those quiet rides, Emma whispered into Apollo's ear, "You healed me. Now you can rest." And the horse gently nodded, as if he understood. Their farewell didn't come as a sudden break, but as a soul-to-soul agreement. Apollo began lying down more often in the fields under the sun, eyes closed. He slept peacefully. He breathed in calm. And little by little, he withdrew from the world with the same dignity with which he had surrendered to love. One quiet morning, Emma woke with an uneasy feeling in her chest. She dressed quickly, ran out to the paddock, and found him there, lying beneath his favorite tree, muzzle resting on the grass, eyes closed. He was no longer breathing. Beside him lay the blanket she always brought for their picnics. Emma knelt in silence. She ran her hand gently through his mane, and then she cried, not from despair, but from gratitude. Apollo had fulfilled his purpose. He had been more than a horse. He had been her mirror, her safe harbor, her dearest friend. And now she had to let him go. Apollo's burial was an intimate and respectful moment. Benjamin offered a quiet spot beneath a large tree for his memorial. Emma requested no statues, no grand plaques, only a stone that read, "Not every horse needs to be tamed. Some just need to be understood." And so the ranch gained a new landmark, a place of silence and memory, where children came to listen to stories and adults came to breathe deeply. Apollo became a legend, but not the kind found in far-off tales. He was a living legend, woven into the gestures of care that now defined the work on that land. He became part of what the ranch stood for. Emma, now more mature, understood that this wasn't an end, it was a transition. Apollo's energy lived on in her caring hands, in her calming voice, in her eyes that looked beyond the surface. She decided to create a small program at the ranch for city children, anxious, orphaned, abandoned, or simply sad kids, just like she once was. She would use the horses to heal what the world's rush forgot to touch. Benjamin supported the idea without hesitation. He simply said, "This ranch is yours too. Let your soul lead the way." And there, in the place once filled with fear, a legacy began to bloom. Apollo's heart still beat. In others, in her. Years passed, but some things never changed. The sky above Sterling Ranch was still the same, vast, blue, full of promises. The fields remained fertile, now also echoing with the laughter of children and stories born between the stables. Emma, now a young woman, walked among the horses with steady steps and the same serene gaze that once captivated Apollo. She had earned titles, awards, and recognition, but never lost her simplicity. She still preferred silences full of meaning over empty words. And everyone knew she was the heartbeat of that place, the heiress not of a fortune, but of a purpose. Benjamin, his hair now whiter and his eyes softer, watched her with pride. He never called her daughter in public, not out of a lack of affection, but because he knew their bond surpassed any label. Emma was his family, his second chance to love and be loved. On winter nights, they would sit on the porch and watch the sky. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Their love was made of gestures, of shared memories, of losses turned into roots. Benjamin knew he was growing older, but when he looked at Emma, he felt peace. He knew that when his time came, he'd leave the ranch in steady hands and his heart at rest. One day, a journalist visited the ranch to do a feature on the program with the children and the horses. She asked Emma what the secret was. She expected a technical explanation, an innovative method, or a powerful, rehearsed speech. But Emma simply smiled and said, "Listening with your heart." The reporter frowned. "That's it," Emma replied. "When you listen with your heart, you don't see what someone shows you. You see what they're trying to hide." That sentence became the project's motto, carved into wood and placed right at the ranch's entrance. Because there, on that piece of land in Texas, no one was treated based on appearances but on what they needed. On the 5-year anniversary of the program, Emma unveiled a modest statue in the field where Apollo was buried. A bronze sculpture, faceless, just the silhouette of a girl and a horse walking side by side. At the base, a simple inscription read, "A good heart is never lost. It transforms." The guests, visibly moved, rose in a standing ovation. Emma looked out toward the horizon and felt the presence of all who had shaped her, Rachel, Clara, and Apollo, who were no longer there, but whose mark remained in her soul. A tear rolled down her cheek, but it was one of gratitude, because not even death had the power to separate what had been planted in love. And so, Sterling Ranch became more than just a property. It became a symbol, a place where wounds turned into wings, where silence was honored, where bonds were built slowly. Emma, the girl who had once walked alone from the city to a closed gate, was now the guardian of many stories. And at the end of each day, as she looked at the sky painted in orange hues, she always whispered the same words, like a prayer. "Thank you for letting me stay," because she knew, in the depths of her soul, that true love doesn't hold you back. It welcomes, it guides, and, above all, it teaches that a good heart is never lost. Sometimes, life crosses unlikely paths to remind us of what really matters. It wasn't strength that won over Apollo. It was the sensitivity of a girl. It wasn't the reward that moved Emma. It was the call of her soul. When a heart is pure, it doesn't need shortcuts. It arrives where it belongs without a map, without force. And that's why good hearts prevail. Not with shouting, but with gestures. Not with control, but with presence. Because a good heart is never lost. Transforms. If you enjoyed this video, let us know in the comments. Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to subscribe. A big hug, and see you in the next video.